In a little bit, we're hoping to be joined by Dr. Thomas Ambrosio. He's a professor at NDSU, and he made some predictions here on down the road, some of which he was right about, some of which he was wrong about when it comes to Ukraine. But we had that conversation before the Russians invaded. I want to stress this. The Russians brought war and invaded Ukraine. Remember I said those words because they're going to come up a little bit later as well. This war is not the fault of the Ukrainian people. Is that hard to understand? I mean, are we so partisan in this country that we can't realize that this war and agree on the fact that this war was brought on by Vladimir Putin and Russia? I mean, I don't get that. I don't get how we can just simply use talking points, but we'll get to that. We'll get to that in the next segment. I want to just take a step back because here's where I was wrong. The Russian army. When I thought of the Russian army and what they were going to do in Ukraine, I thought, man, that's a juggernaut. I mean, these guys are all about their military. These guys are all about making sure that they win when it comes to war. Well, you could make an argument that they're not winning when it comes to war. It's pretty easy for them, obviously, with Ukraine fighting these battles all on their own to blow up cities. You know, just keep shooting from afar. But when it comes to invading those cities, the Ukrainian people have pretty much held them off. Which, you know, it isn't just, we like to look back and say, gee, it's because of the weaponry that we offered them and that we've gotten them and that NATO has backed them. It isn't just that. In fact, that isn't even close to the main cause of what's going on here. What's going on here is the Ukrainians fight like, I probably shouldn't say that word on TV, but they fight. They fight. They're not going to give up their homeland. They're not going to give up their country. They're going to put that wall out there. They're going to stop and say, this is it. You can't do what you want to do. You can't take our country away from us. So I had this image of this being a very short war. Now, granted, it's still only been, a little over 4 weeks. But I had this image of the Russians coming and storming right through if we didn't do anything to stop them. They haven't. They haven't. In fact, if you look at the Russian casualties in this war, they're immense. Those are body bags going home to Russian parents. I don't think that the Russian people, and quite frankly, I didn't think there were going to be this many Russian casualties at this point in what is an invasion of Ukraine. I didn't think it. When I thought of the Russian army, I thought completely different. And so I just am so impressed with the Ukrainian army, the Ukrainian people, their dedication to their country. I told you before this segment that Dr. Thomas Ambrosio, the professor at NDSU, who's been good enough to join us before, is somebody I count on because he's an expert when it comes to issues like this. Let's bring him in. Professor, good to have you coming down the road with us.
Glad to be here.
I'm going to ask you, did you, because we talked about whether or not they were going to fully invade. We've talked about some of these issues in the past, and I just want to point out that the Biden administration all along said they were going to do this, and I don't think either one of us were that sure at any one point, but man, the Ukrainian people have shown the courage that they have, Professor.
And it's amazing, seemingly how unprepared the Russians are or were, but also that the fact that the Ukrainians, even though they were far weaker militarily, have just fought incredibly well and have shown incredible courage and a mobilization of the entire society to a degree that we haven't seen in recent memory. And we're starting to see actual counterattacks by Ukrainian troops and the Russians being pushed back from their positions. And I saw one tweet today that said something to the effect of, and I agree with this, push them all the way back to Moscow, boys.
Yeah. Why do you think that is? I mean, it's, aside from what we both know and the world knows now, the resolve, the dedication, the fearlessness of the Ukrainian people. Okay, let's just put that aside. What other factors play into the fact that the Russian army looks the way it does today?
I would say there's probably three things. One, they tried something initially, a lightning strike against Ukraine, that completely failed. So they got bogged down very, very quickly. Second of all, they attacked on too many fronts. They basically, there's kind of four separate axes of advance that they're doing, and they spread themselves out too thinly rather than concentrating on, say, one area and then taking that and then moving on to other areas. They try to do everything at once. And also, finally, the Russian logistical capacity in general is weaker than certainly in the Western Army, but they rely so much on trucks, so much on their rail lines, I should say, that they don't actually have a whole lot of trucks, but they've had to rely on trucks for this battle because the Ukrainians have blown up all the rail lines.
Yeah.
Which means that they can't ship things in. So they're relying on a logistical capacity that they don't have in this conflict. So they've had to rely on it more, and they simply are not able to do it.
Can you imagine a scenario, being a student of history and an educator when it comes to history, of what Dwight Eisenhower would be doing if he had men in the field and they ran out of fuel? I mean, can you possibly imagine that scenario?
We actually did have some of that during World War II, where we had to shift fronts of advance during our axes of advance into Germany, depending on where we could get fuel, but nothing like this. I mean, they didn't even have adequate food. And then ultimately, even beyond all of that, Russian military morale is extremely low. They sent untrained conscripts into battle. They have used their force in a piecemeal fashion, which is, again, bizarre. I mean, if you're going to invade a country, you don't hold back. And although we've seen incredible brutality by the Russian government, they also have just done this bizarre, almost inexplicable military operation that, as someone who studies Russia, as someone who is interested in these kind of military affairs more broadly, and especially how great powers fight wars, I can't wait to see actually what happened. And we may never truly know, but clearly there's no coordination here.
Yeah. When you look at this, Professor, and you see a scenario, or do you see a scenario where Ukraine can win, where they can win this war without any help from NATO now?
Well, I mean, they're getting a substantial military assistance from NATO, but without NATO intervention, depending on how you want to define winning, ultimately, I think that Ukraine will trade territory for some type of a peace deal. That's what it looks like. We're kind of getting hints at, but I don't know. I mean, Russia is facing strategic defeat, but that could make them more desperate and much more dangerous.
Yeah. Can you see a scenario where the embarrassment that Vladimir Putin has on a world stage and the sanctions that NATO countries and many others have placed upon Russia, can you see a scenario where he's backed in a corner and the next thing you know, he is hitting that big red button?
Yes, maybe not the big red button, but I think he might become more desperate and may do something beyond just conventional military force. And there's increasing chatter, certainly from the Biden administration, that this is a real fear of ours, either biological, chemical, or at the absolute worst, nuclear.
I was visiting with my wife, and she said she gets up in the morning, and prays that President Zelensky is still alive, knowing the harm's way that he and his family are in, and the courage that he's shown as a leader. And I wake up in the morning to see if Vladimir Putin is alive. because this is something I don't think gets talked about that much. But if you look at what's happened to the economy in Russia, where it's going to be in the future, what the world's perception now is of Russia, he isn't the only person in Russia. No matter how long that table is, somebody's got to be looking at him and saying, look, what was it called? The wolf's lair, the lion. Somebody's got to be looking at a plan to take him out like the Germans tried to take out Hitler. I mean,
exactly. That's a real possibility. Leaders do fall as a result of failed wars, but they remarkably sometimes survive. It'll be one of those situations where we won't even have any real signs of it until it simply happens. It'll be one day, again, we wake up and Vladimir Putin's there. Next day we wake up and he's not. But he has certainly upset the military, I believe. He's certainly upset the oligarchs who have lost their fortunes or are losing their fortunes. And he's upset the broader population. Now, those matter probably less, but elites may use that broader popular unrest or popular lack of popularity that Putin may still have against Putin, as basically saying, look, if we don't move against him now, we all lose.
Okay, last one, I promise. Does this change the global economy forever?
It significantly changes it.
Yeah.
We're going to see food shortages if this lasts too long in the global South.
Yep.
And globalization itself has kind of taken a step back.
Yep. Doctor, thank you. Thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.